At breakfast, I saw my photo in the trash and heard my grandson say, "The photo album only has people mommy likes." I stayed silent. The next afternoon, my lawyer delivered the papers for the sale of the house. "I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached." I stood there, frozen, staring at the crumpled photograph lying among coffee grounds and eggshells. The edges were torn, but my face was still visible, smiling from 20 years ago when I still had chestnut hair instead of gray. My hands trembled as I fished it out of the garbage. "Grandma, what are you doing?" 7-year-old Noah's voice startled me. I quickly wiped my fingers on my apron and tucked the photo into my pocket. "Just cleaning up a bit, sweetheart." I forced a smile. Noah tilted his head, his innocent eyes studying me. "The photo album only has people mommy likes. That's what she told Daddy when she was throwing stuff away yesterday." My heart cracked a little more. I'd suspected for years that my daughter Alara was systematically erasing me from family memories, but hearing it confirmed so plainly from a child's mouth made it impossible to deny any longer. "Is that so?" I managed to keep my voice steady, though inside I was crumbling. Noah nodded earnestly. "She said some people don't deserve to be remembered." I bent down and kissed his forehead, inhaling the sweet scent of his shampoo, wondering if soon this too would be taken from me. "Why don't you go play in the yard while I finish up in here?" Once Noah was gone, I leaned against the counter and closed my eyes. This was my kitchen in my house. The house I'd owned for 43 years. The house where I'd raised Alara. The house I'd struggled to keep after her father died. Yet for the past 7 years, since Alara, her husband Peter, and their children had moved in temporarily, I'd been made to feel increasingly like an unwelcome guest. "Mom, did you use the last of the coffee again?" Alara's sharp voice cut through my thoughts as she swept into the kitchen, already dressed for her part-time job at the real estate office. At 39, she looked so much like me at that age, but carried none of the warmth I'd tried to instill in her. "I bought more yesterday. It's in the pantry," I replied. She sighed dramatically. "I've told you 1,000,000 times to leave it on the counter where I can see it." "Sorry, I forgot." I'd actually deliberately put it in the pantry, where coffee had been stored in this house for 4 decades, but these small acts of rebellion were all I had left. "Whatever." She rummaged through the pantry, purposely making a mess of the shelves. I'd organized that morning. "Peter and I are having friends over tonight. We'll need you to watch the kids upstairs." Not a request, a command. In my own home. "Actually, I have plans tonight," I said, surprising even myself. Alara turned, coffee can in hand, eyebrows raised. "Plans? What plans could you possibly have?" The dismissive tone, the underlying message that my life couldn't possibly contain anything important, ignited something inside me. "I'm meeting with Stanley Cooper," I said, mentioning my late husband's attorney, a name I knew would get her attention. Her eyes narrowed. "Why?" "Just some paperwork that needs updating," I replied vaguely. In truth, I had made the appointment that morning, after weeks of consideration. 7 years of being treated like a servant in my own home. 7 years of watching Alara and Peter live rent-free, contribution-free, respect-free under my roof. 7 years of being pushed further into the margins of family life, while they took over every room, every decision, every conversation. Finding my photograph in the trash was just the final confirmation that I needed to take action. "Fine, I'll get Mrs. Winters from next door," Alara huffed, clearly annoyed but not suspicious enough to press further. That evening, while Alara and Peter entertained their friends downstairs, their laughter and music flooding the house, I sat in Stanley Cooper's office discussing options I never thought I'd consider. "You're absolutely certain about this, Inez?" Stanley asked, his kind eyes studying me over reading glasses. I nodded, my heart heavy, but my resolve strengthening. "It's time, Stanley. They've been temporarily living in my house for 7 years. They don't contribute to the mortgage or utilities. They've taken over every room except my small bedroom. And now, I pulled out the crumpled photograph from my pocket. My own daughter is erasing me while I'm still alive. Stanley sighed, leaning back in his chair. It won't be easy. There will be pushback. I know, I whispered, thinking of Noah and his younger sister Lily. My grandchildren were the only reason I'd endured this situation for so long. But I can't continue like this. I'm 68 years old. I want peace in whatever time I have left. The next afternoon, Stanley delivered the papers as promised. Not eviction notices. I couldn't bring myself to be that harsh. But documents outlining a formal rental agreement or, alternatively, a timeline for them to find their own housing. I sat at my small desk, staring at the papers, knowing that once I presented them to Ilara and Peter, there would be no going back. Everything would change. But as I heard Peter's booming voice commanding Noah to keep it down, followed by the sound of my grandson's muffled crying, I knew I had no choice. It was time to reclaim my home and my dignity, whatever the cost. The papers sat on my desk for 3 days while I gathered my courage. Each time I considered presenting them to Ilara and Peter, another memory would surface, making my hand pause over the documents. 7 years. It didn't happen overnight. It began with a phone call. Ilara sobbing that Peter had lost his job, that they couldn't make rent, that they might end up on the street with 4-year-old Noah. Just for a few months, Mom, she had promised. Until we get back on our feet. I still remember helping them move in, how Peter had complained about the size of the guest room, how Ilara had immediately rearranged my living room furniture without asking. I'd said nothing, wanting to be helpful, understanding their stress. 2 months later, Ilara announced her pregnancy with Lily. We'll start looking for our own place after the baby comes, she assured me. It just makes sense to stay put for now. By the time Lily was born, Peter had found another job, but it paid less than his previous position. We're saving up, became the new refrain. Just a little longer. A little longer stretched into years. I was washing dishes when the memory of my 65th birthday surfaced. How I'd come downstairs to find they'd hosted a party in my home but hadn't included me. Oh, we didn't think you'd be interested, Ilara had said when I appeared in my own living room, confused by the strangers occupying my furniture. It's just Peter's work friends. I had retreated to my bedroom that night, listening to laughter and music through the walls, feeling like a ghost in my own home. Then came the smaller indignities. Peter accidentally throwing out my favorite armchair, claiming it was too worn. Ilara repainting rooms without consulting me. My gardening tools disappearing. My special occasion dishes being used for everyday meals and getting chipped. When I dared express concern, the response was always the same. Don't be so uptight, Mom. It's just stuff. But it wasn't just stuff. It was my life being systematically dismantled. The financial burden grew heavier, too. My modest pension and Social Security had once been enough for me to live comfortably. Now it was stretched to cover 5 people. Grocery bills tripled. The electricity bills soared with multiple televisions and computers running constantly. When the water heater broke, it was my savings that paid for the replacement. We'll pay you back when we can, Peter always said, but that day never came. Then there were the comments within earshot. Mom's getting so forgetful. We really need to start thinking about her care options. This house is too much for her to manage anyway. I wasn't forgetful. I wasn't incapable. I was being deliberately undermined. The sound of the front door slamming jolted me from my thoughts. Heavy footsteps approached my bedroom, the only space that remained somewhat mine, though even that was regularly invaded. Inez? Peter's voice boomed through the door before he pushed it open without knocking. Have you seen my gray suit jacket? Alara said she left it in here after organizing the closets. Organizing the closets. A pleasant euphemism for what had actually happened. Alara had decided my closet was wasted space, since I hardly had any clothes anyway, and had moved half of their belongings into it. I hung it in the hall closet, I replied, quickly sliding the legal papers under a magazine. Peter frowned, crossing his arms. At 42, he was a large man who used his size to intimidate, often standing too close when speaking to me. I already checked there. Then I don't know where it is, I said, keeping my voice even. Maybe ask Alara? She's not home, he said, irritably. She took the kids to that birthday party. I'm already late for my interview. An interview. This was news to me. You're looking for a new job? He shifted uncomfortably. Just exploring options. Construction isn't what it used to be. Translation? Another job change was coming. Peter had held 5 different positions in 7 years, each one supposedly better than the last, but somehow never improving their financial situation enough for them to move out. I hope it goes well, I said neutrally. He turned to leave. Then, paused. By the way, Noah mentioned you had some kind of meeting with a lawyer? Something about the house? My heart raced. I had been so careful not to discuss anything with the children. Noah must have misunderstood. I was just updating some personal paperwork. Peter studied me for a moment too long. Right. Well, if there's anything about the house, you should talk to us first. You know how Alara worries about you managing everything alone. The threat was thinly veiled. They were watching, suspicious of any move that might disrupt their comfortable arrangement. After he left, I retrieved the papers from beneath the magazine. My hand trembled slightly as I traced the formal legal language outlining my rights as the homeowner. Stanley had been thorough, presenting multiple options, from a formal lease agreement to a timeline for them to vacate. A crash from downstairs startled me. I rushed down to find Lily standing amid the shattered remains of a blue pottery bowl, a wedding gift from my mother, one of the few personal items I'd managed to keep in the main living areas. I'm sorry, Grandma, the 5-year-old whispered, her eyes wide with fear. I was trying to reach the cookies. It's okay, sweetheart, I soothed, bending to carefully pick up the larger pieces. Accidents happen. Mommy says you have too many old things anyway, Lily said innocently, repeating words clearly heard from her mother. I froze, a jagged piece of blue pottery clutched in my hand. Too many old things, like me. An old thing that had outlived its usefulness but stubbornly refused to disappear. That evening, when Alara returned with Noah from the birthday party, I heard her in the kitchen with Peter. I'm telling you, she was meeting with a lawyer. Peter's voice was low but urgent. Noah overheard her on the phone. Don't be paranoid, Alara dismissed. What could she possibly do? This house has been our home for years. It's still in her name, Peter hissed. What if she's thinking of selling? Or worse, what if she's changing her will? Their voices dropped even lower, but I'd heard enough. They weren't concerned about me. They were concerned about their claim to my property. That night, I couldn't sleep. Rain pattered against my window as I stared at the ceiling, thinking about how I'd ended up here. A prisoner in my own home, my existence tolerated only because of what I provided. Free housing, free childcare, free financial support whenever needed. Lightning flashed, illuminating the room, and in that brief brightness, I made my decision. Tomorrow, I would present the papers. Tomorrow, I would begin reclaiming my life. Whatever storm followed couldn't possibly be worse than the slow erosion of my dignity I'd already endured for 7 years. Morning arrived with unusual clarity. I'd expected to wake with doubts, but instead felt a strange calm as I prepared breakfast. The same breakfast I'd made nearly every day for 7 years while my daughter and her husband slept in. Pancakes, Grandma, Noah asked, climbing onto his usual stool at the counter. His hair was tousled from sleep, his Spider-Man pajamas wrinkled. Blueberry, I confirmed, sliding a plate in front of him. Your favorite. He beamed, immediately, drowning the stack in syrup. You always remember. Such a simple observation, yet it squeezed my heart. I did always remember. The little things that made each of my grandchildren feel special. Noah's blueberry pancakes, Lily's crusts cut off her sandwiches, the dinosaur-shaped chicken nuggets they both preferred. The specific way each liked to be tucked in at night. Would Alara remember these details if I weren't here? The thought sent a chill through me. Morning, Alara mumbled, shuffling into the kitchen in her bathrobe, heading straight for the coffee I'd already brewed. Peters, got that second interview today. He'll need the car. Not a request, not even a complete thought, just another assumption that my needs were secondary. I have an appointment this afternoon, I said, flipping another pancake. Alara frowned over her coffee mug. Can't you reschedule? This interview is important. So is my appointment. I kept, my voice level, focusing on the pancake rather than her incredulous expression. What appointment could possibly be so important? The dismissive tone was back, the one that implied my life consisted of nothing but serving their needs. I slid the last pancake onto a plate. I need to speak with both you and Peter this evening, after the children are in bed. Something in my tone must have registered because Alara's eyes narrowed. What's this about, Mom? This evening, I repeated, setting down the spatula and leaving the kitchen before she could question me further. As I dressed for the day, I heard them in the hallway. Alara's hushed, urgent tones and Peter's deeper rumble. They were already strategizing, already preparing to counter whatever I might say before they'd even heard it. For a moment, my resolve wavered. What if this made everything worse? What if they retaliated by keeping the children from me? What if the confrontation became ugly and traumatic for Noah and Lily? But then I caught sight of the crumpled photograph I'd rescued from the trash, which I'd placed on my dresser as a reminder. My daughter was already erasing me from the family narrative. How much longer before the children began to see me as Alara clearly did, as an inconvenience, an obstacle, someone whose presence was tolerated only for what I provided? I picked up the legal papers from my desk and slipped them into my handbag. Whatever happened next, I couldn't continue as I had been, disappearing piece by piece in my own home. The day passed in a blur of routine tasks and mounting tension. Peter returned from his interview radiating the false confidence I'd come to recognize as his response to failure. Alara was unusually quiet, watching me with suspicious eyes as I prepared dinner and helped the children with homework. At 8:30, with both children finally asleep, I made tea and set 3 cups on the kitchen table, a small ritual of normalcy before what I knew would be anything but a normal conversation. So, what's this about, Mom? Alara asked as soon as she and Peter joined me at the table. Her arms were crossed defensively. She hadn't touched her tea. I took a steadying breath and placed the documents on the table. I've been thinking a lot about our living arrangement. Peter immediately tensed. What about it? It's been 7 years, I said, working to keep my voice even. When you moved in, it was meant to be temporary. Alara's eyes flashed. So you're what? Evicting us? Your own family? I'm not evicting anyone, I clarified, though her immediate leap to victimhood didn't surprise me. I'm proposing that we formalize our arrangement. I slid the papers toward them. These are 2 options. The first is a rental agreement. You would pay a fair but below market rent and contribute proportionally to utilities. The second is a timeline. For transition, 6 months to find alternative housing with my help if needed. The silence that followed was deafening. Peter's face had turned an alarming shade of red, while Alara's had drained of all color. You can't be serious, she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm very serious, I replied. This situation isn't working anymore, Alara. Not for me. Peter slammed his hand on the table, making the teacups rattle. This is our home. No, Peter, I said firmly. This is my home. The home I paid for. The home I've maintained for 43 years. The home I've allowed you to live in rent-free for 7 years. Allowed? Alara's voice rose sharply. We're family. We take care of each other. Do you? I asked quietly. Take care of me? Something flickered across her face. Guilt? Recognition? But it was quickly replaced by indignation. We've been managing this household for years, she argued. Making improvements, keeping things running smoothly. Do you have any idea what it would cost you to hire someone to do everything we do around here? I almost laughed at the absurdity. Everything you do? I cook your meals. I clean your messes. I watch your children while you both work or socialize. I pay for utilities that have tripled since you moved in. I've dipped into my savings repeatedly to cover household expenses. So, that's what this is about? Money? Peter's tone was scathing. No, I said, meeting his gaze steadily. It's about respect. It's about acknowledging that this is my home, not yours. It's about the fact that my own daughter threw away my photograph and told her children I don't deserve to be in the family album. Alara's eyes widened slightly. She hadn't known I'd overheard that particular revelation. You're taking a child's misunderstanding and blowing it out of proportion, she said dismissively. Am I? I reached into my pocket and pulled out the crumpled photograph. I found this in the kitchen garbage 3 days ago. Noah saw me retrieve it and told me exactly what you said. Alara flushed, caught in the lie. Peter quickly stepped in. Look, Inez, if there have been misunderstandings or hurt feelings, we can work through them. But these legal documents, this ultimatum, it's extreme and unnecessary. I've tried talking to you both for years, I said wearily. I've asked for help with expenses. I've requested basic courtesy in my own home. Nothing changes. So, what happens? If we refuse? Peter asked, his tone dangerous now. You'll throw us out on the street? Your own daughter and grandchildren? I'm giving you options and time, I replied, refusing to be baited. What you choose to do with them is up to you. Alara stood abruptly, tears streaming down her face. I can't believe you're doing this to us, after everything we've done for you. As she stormed out of the kitchen, Peter leaned across the table, his voice low and threatening. You'll regret this, Inez. I promise you that. He followed Alara, leaving me alone with the documents and cooling tea. Despite the confrontation, or perhaps because of it, I felt lighter than I had in years. The truth was finally out in the open. There would be consequences, difficult days ahead, but for the first time in a very long time, I had stood up for myself. I was reclaiming my home, one painful step at a time. I woke to a house of silence. No rattling dishes, no children's laughter, no morning greetings, just the hollow quiet of a home where war had been declared. For 3 days following our confrontation, Alara and Peter maintained a calculated freeze-out. They spoke to me only when absolutely necessary, in clipped tones that barely concealed their fury. They left early, returned late, and took the children with them whenever possible. It was psychological warfare, designed to make me cave under the weight of loneliness and guilt. I was in the garden, methodically weeding my tomato plants, when my neighbor Margaret called over the fence. Haven't seen the little ones around lately, she observed, wiping her brow with a handkerchief. At 72, Margaret had been my neighbor for nearly 3 decades. She'd watched Alara grow up and had witnessed the gradual takeover of my home with a disapproving eye. They're staying with Peter's sister for a few days, I replied, the lie bitter on my tongue. In truth, I had no idea where they went during the day. They didn't tell me, and I didn't ask. Margaret studied me for a moment. Everything all right, Inez? You seem different. I sat back on my heels, considering how much to share. I've asked Alara and Peter to either start paying rent or find their own place. Margaret's eyebrows shot up. Well, it's about time. That's been coming for years. Her immediate support loosened something tight in my chest. They're not taking it well. Of course they're not, Margaret scoffed. They've had a free ride for how long now? 7 years? They won't give that up without a fight. I'm afraid of what that fight might look like, I admitted, voicing the fear that had kept me awake at night. I don't want to lose my grandchildren. Margaret's expression softened. Have you spoken with a lawyer about your rights as a grandparent? I nodded. Stanley says I have options, but it would mean going to court if they try to cut me off completely. I don't want it to come to that. Let's hope it doesn't, Margaret said gently. But Inez, don't back down. You deserve better than what they've been giving you. Her words stayed with me as I finished my gardening and went inside to prepare a solitary lunch. The house felt cavernous without the children's energy filling it. I missed Noah's endless questions and Lily's imaginative games. I even missed the chaos of their toys scattered across the living room floor. But I wouldn't give in to emotional manipulation. I couldn't. That afternoon, the first volley in their counteroffensive arrived. My phone rang, my sister Barbara, calling. From Arizona. Inez, what on earth is going on? Her voice crackled with static and accusation. Alara just called me in tears, saying you're trying to force them out of their home. My grip tightened on the phone. It's my home, Barbara, and I'm not forcing anyone out. I've given them options. After letting them live there for years, you're suddenly changing the rules, Barbara argued. Alara says they've put thousands into improving the property, and now you want to charge them rent or make them leave? I almost laughed. What improvements? Peter installed a ceiling fan, incorrectly I might add, and Alara painted a few rooms without asking me first. Meanwhile, I've continued paying the mortgage, all utilities, and most grocery bills. She says you've become forgetful and paranoid, Barbara continued, ignoring my explanation. That you're making accusations and imagining slights. She's worried about your mental state, Inez. The calculated cruelty of it stung. They were questioning my sanity to undermine my decision, a classic tactic I'd seen used against other aging parents. I'm perfectly sound of mind, Barbara, as my doctor and lawyer can attest, I replied, keeping my voice steady. If you'd like to come visit and see the situation for yourself, you're welcome any time. Barbara sighed heavily. I'm just concerned. This doesn't sound like you. Maybe that's the problem, I said quietly. I've been too accommodating for too long. After hanging up, I sat in my armchair, trembling slightly. So that was their strategy. Mobilize family members against me while suggesting I was mentally unfit. It was both predictable and deeply hurtful. By evening, 3 more relatives had called, each reciting similar talking points. My niece Jennifer was particularly harsh. How could you do this to your own grandchildren? Do you want them to be homeless? When the doorbell rang around 8 o'clock, I almost didn't answer, expecting another relative sent to pressure me. Instead, I found Noah standing on the porch, his small backpack clutched to his chest. Noah? Where are your parents? I asked, looking past him to the empty driveway. They dropped me at Tyler's for a play date, he said, his voice small. But I told Tyler's mom I wanted to come see you instead. She drove me. I looked up to see a minivan at the curb, a woman waving from the driver's seat. I waved back, mouthing, "Thank you," before gently guiding Noah inside. Won't your parents be worried when they go to pick you up from Tyler's? I asked, concerned about the fallout. Noah shrugged. They said they weren't coming until 9. I just wanted to see you, Grandma, and make sure you were okay. My heart squeezed painfully. Why wouldn't I be okay, sweetheart? His lower lip trembled. Daddy said you're sick, that you're confused and saying mean things, and Mommy was crying and saying we might have to move because you don't want us anymore. I knelt down to his level. taking his small hands in mine. "Noah, listen to me. I am not sick or confused, and I will always, always want you and Lily in my life." "Then why do we have to move?" His eyes, so trusting and confused, nearly broke my resolve. How could I explain the complexities of adult relationships to a 7-year-old? How could I tell him his parents had taken advantage of my love for years? That they were now weaponizing him and his sister in an attempt to manipulate me? "Sometimes," I began carefully, "grown-ups need to have their own spaces. It doesn't mean we love each other any less. It just means we need some healthy boundaries." Noah's brow furrowed. "Like when you tell me and Lily not to come into your room without knocking?" I smiled gently. "Something like that, yes." He seemed to consider this, then nodded solemnly. "I always knock now, even when your door is open." "I know you do. You're very respectful. Unlike your parents," I didn't add. The sound of a car screeching into the driveway interrupted our conversation. Moments later, the front door burst open, and Alara rushed in, her face a mask of fury and panic. "Noah!" she cried, scooping him up. "We've been looking everywhere for you. Tyler's mom said you disappeared." "I wanted to see Grandma," Noah explained simply. Alara's eyes met mine over Noah's head, cold with accusation. "You should have called us immediately." "He just arrived," I said calmly. "And I would have, if you'd given me your new cell number. After you changed it 3 days ago." Her jaw tightened at being caught in another petty maneuver. Without another word, she carried Noah out to the car where Peter waited, engine running. I watched them drive away, a mixture of sadness and determination settling in my chest. They were escalating, using the children as emotional pawns, spreading lies to family members, isolating me from my support system. But they had miscalculated. Their tactics weren't weakening my resolve. They were strengthening it, proving exactly why this change was necessary. As I locked the door for the night, my phone pinged with a text from an unknown number. It was a photo of Noah and Lily, smiling, on a playground I didn't recognize, with a message from Alara. "Remember what's at stake." A threat, plain and simple. I sank onto the sofa, the house's silence pressing in around me like a physical weight. For the first time since making my decision, I allowed myself to cry, not from doubt, but from the heartbreaking realization that my own daughter would use her children as leverage in this battle for control. The war had moved beyond silent. It had become cruel. 2 weeks of Cold War tactics had left me exhausted, but determined. Alara and Peter had escalated from silent treatment to active sabotage, accidentally. Disconnecting the internet when I needed to email Stanley, scheduling. Repairmen without telling me, and most painfully, severely restricting my time with Noah and Lily. The children were clearly confused by the tension. Twice I'd overheard Noah asking why they couldn't spend time with me, only to be hushed with vague explanations about Grandma needing space or Grandma not feeling well. I was in the kitchen preparing lunch when Margaret called. "Inez, do you have a minute? I have some information you should know." Wiping my hands on a dish towel, I moved to the window overlooking our adjoining yards. "What is it?" "I just overheard Peter on his cell phone in your backyard," she said, her voice low, as if she might be overheard. "He was talking to someone about getting your house appraised." My stomach dropped. "What?" "He was saying they needed to know the current market value for when they take over the property." His exact words. A cold fury settled in my chest. "Thank you, Margaret. I appreciate you telling me." "Be careful, Inez. They're playing dirty." After hanging up, I sat at my kitchen table, thoughts racing. What exactly were they planning? Was Peter simply being optimistic about wearing me down, or did they have some scheme to claim ownership of my home? I called Stanley immediately. "They can't take your house, Inez," he assured me after I explained what Margaret had overheard. "Your will currently leaves the property to Alara, but that can be changed. and they certainly have no legal claim to it while you're alive. Could they try to have me declared incompetent? Stanley's pause spoke volumes. It's a tactic some adult children use, yes, but it would require medical evidence, which they don't have. When was your last checkup? 3 months ago. Dr. Hansen gave me a clean bill of health, including cognitive function. Good. I suggest you get a copy of that report for our files. After the call, I went to my bedroom and opened my safe. Inside was my will, insurance policies, and a small jewelry box containing the few valuable pieces I'd inherited from my mother. Everything appeared untouched, but Peter's conversation about taking over left me deeply unsettled. I removed my will, planning to take it to Stanley for immediate revision. As I closed the safe, my gaze fell on the framed photograph beside my bed. Alara at her college graduation, beaming with pride as I stood beside her. It was one of the last truly happy moments we'd shared before she met Peter. Had he changed? Her so completely? Or had the selfish entitlement always been there, merely awakened by his influence? The sound of the front door opening pulled me from my thoughts. Quickly, I tucked the will into my desk drawer and headed downstairs. Alara stood in the entryway, alone for once. She looked tired, the dark circles under her eyes matching my own. "We need to talk," she said, her voice lacking its usual edge. Wary of another manipulation tactic, I nodded and led her to the living room. We sat on opposite ends of the sofa that I'd purchased 30 years ago, a sofa they'd been trying to replace for years, claiming it was outdated. "Peter and I have discussed your proposal," she began, carefully selecting her words. "We've decided we can pay $400 a month in rent." I almost laughed. The market rate for a 3-bedroom house in our neighborhood was 3 times that amount. "That's not sufficient, Alara." Her lips tightened. "It's all we can afford right now." "That's not true, and we both know it," I replied evenly. "Peter makes good money at the construction company. You work part-time. You have no student loans, no car payments, and you've been living rent-free for 7 years. Where does your money go?" The question hung in the air between us. I'd never directly confronted her about their finances before, having been trained, over the years, to accept whatever explanation they offered. "That's none of your business," she finally said, but her eyes slid away from mine. "It becomes my business when you're living in my home and claiming poverty to avoid paying fair rent." Alara's posture stiffened. "Fine. $600 then. That's our final offer." I shook my head. "The rental agreement Stanley drafted sets the amount at $1,200, which is still below market rate. It also requires you to pay 1/3 of the utilities and maintain renter's insurance." "That's ridiculous!" Alara's voice rose sharply. "We're family, not tenants." "Family respects boundaries," I said quietly. "Family contributes. Family doesn't erase members from photo albums or spread lies about mental decline." Her cheeks flushed. Noah misunderstood what he heard, and that photo was damaged. I was going to replace it. The lie was so transparent I didn't bother challenging it. Instead, I reached for the manila envelope I'd placed on the coffee table that morning, anticipating this conversation. "These are your options, Alara. Pay the fair rent outlined in this agreement, or begin making arrangements to move out within 60 days. I've included information on several affordable apartments in good school districts for the children." She stared at the envelope as if it might bite her. "You can't be serious." "I've never been more serious in my life." Her eyes filled with tears, whether genuine or strategic. I couldn't tell anymore. "Where are we supposed to go? How could you do this to your own grandchildren?" The emotional manipulation was so predictable it had lost its power. "I'm not doing anything to my grandchildren. I'm establishing healthy boundaries with my adult daughter and her husband after years of being taken advantage of." "Taken advantage of?" Her voice cracked with indignation. "We've been managing this household, raising children, working full-time, In a house you don't pay for, I interrupted, my patience finally snapping. Using utilities you don't contribute toward, eating food largely purchased with my money, while treating me like an unwelcome guest in my own home. Alara stood abruptly. I can't believe how selfish you've become. Dad would be ashamed of you. The mention of my late husband, her father, was calculated to wound. It did, but not in the way she intended. Your father valued self-respect above all else, I said, my voice steady despite the pain lancing through me. He worked himself to exhaustion to pay off this house so I would always have security. He would be heartbroken to see how you've treated that legacy. For a moment, something like shame flickered across Alara's face. Then her expression hardened again. Peter was right. There's no reasoning with you anymore. She snatched the envelope from the table. We'll look these over, but don't expect us to just roll over and accept your terms. The terms aren't negotiable, Alara, I said firmly. Either sign the rental agreement by the end of the week or give me your move-out date. She turned to leave, then paused at the doorway. You know, if you force us out, you might never see Noah and Lily again. Is that really what you want? The threat hung in the air between us, ugly and explicit now rather than merely implied. That would be your choice, not mine, I replied, fighting to keep my voice from trembling. And it would say everything about who you've become. After she left, I sat in the quiet living room, my heart pounding. I had done it, issued the ultimatum I'd been working toward for weeks. There was no going back now. Whatever came next would either break me completely or finally set me free from years of slow suffocation in my own home. That evening, I called Stanley and asked him to revise my will. No longer would my house automatically pass to Alara upon my death. Instead, it would be sold, with the proceeds split between a trust for my grandchildren's education and several charities I'd supported over the years. It wasn't about revenge. It was about consequences, and finally acknowledging that the daughter I'd raised was not the woman who now lived under my roof. 3 days after our confrontation, I woke to unusual sounds from downstairs, drawers opening and closing, furniture being moved. Cautiously, I made my way to the kitchen to find Peter and Alara silently packing boxes. What's happening? I asked, though I could guess the answer. Peter didn't look up, but Alara turned to face me, her expression a mixture of defiance and defeat. We're moving out, she said flatly. Since you've made it clear we're not welcome here anymore. The dramatic framing didn't surprise me, but their decision did. I had expected more resistance, more manipulation, perhaps even legal challenges. I see, I said carefully. When? We found a place, Peter interjected, his tone clipped. We can move in next weekend. That was surprisingly fast. Too fast, actually, given the rental market in our area. Something didn't add up. Where? I asked. An apartment complex across town, Alara replied vaguely. It's not what we wanted, but since you've forced our hand. The guilt trip was so transparent. I almost smiled. I'm glad you found something suitable. Peter snorted derisively but said nothing more. They continued packing in sullen silence, ignoring me as I made my morning coffee. Later that day, while they were out, Margaret called again. Inez, I think you should know. Peter's parents bought a condo last month. I just overheard Alara telling her friend they're moving there, not to an apartment. The pieces clicked into place. So that's their plan. Make me feel guilty about forcing them into a cramped apartment when they're actually moving into a condo. Apparently, his parents are in Florida most of the year, so they'll have the place to themselves. Alara was laughing about how they won't have to pay rent there either. I sighed, unsurprised yet still disappointed by their continued dishonesty. Thank you for telling me, Margaret. Will you confront them? I considered the question. No. If they're leaving willingly, that's what matters. Let them keep their pride with their little deception. The week that followed was tense but productive. Ilara and Peter packed methodically, taking far more than they had ever brought into the house, including several items that had been mine. I said nothing about the missing serving platters, the vanished power tools, or the disappearance of the good towels. Small prices to pay for my freedom. The children, however, were another matter. Noah and Lily had been told they were going on an adventure to a new home, but they were clearly confused and upset by the sudden change. "Why can't you come with us, Grandma?" Lily asked one evening, her small face solemn as she watched me prepare dinner. "Because this is my home, sweetheart," I explained gently. "But you'll still see me often." "Promise?" Her eyes, so like Ilara's when she was young, searched mine for reassurance. "I promise," I said, though I wondered if I could keep that promise, given Ilara's threats. Moving day arrived with unexpected swiftness. A small rental truck sat in the driveway, half filled with boxes and furniture. Noah and Lily ran between the house and truck, alternately excited by the novelty and anxious about the change. I stayed out of the way, watching from the kitchen as my home was gradually emptied of their presence. It was strange. The space already felt different, lighter somehow, despite the chaos of moving. "We'll be back for the rest tomorrow," Peter announced curtly when the yee truck was full. He didn't meet my eyes, hadn't looked directly at me in days. Ilara lingered in the entryway, her expression unreadable. "The kids want to say goodbye." Noah and Lily rushed to hug me, their small arms tight around my waist. I held them close, breathing in the scent of their hair, memorizing the feeling of their warmth against me. "We'll see Grandma soon, right, Mommy?" Noah asked, looking up at Ilara with trusting eyes. A moment of tension stretched between us. This was it, the moment Ilara would either honor the children's relationship with me or begin the process of severing it. Something shifted in her expression, perhaps recognition of the weight of this moment, perhaps simple exhaustion from the stress of moving. "Yes," she said finally. "We'll figure out a regular visiting schedule." Relief washed through me, though I knew better than to fully trust the promise. Still, it was something. A small opening where I had feared a complete closure. After they left, I walked slowly through my house, taking inventory of the spaces that had been reclaimed. It would take time to refill them with my own presence, my own choices, but for the first time in 7 years I could. That evening, I sat on my back porch, watching the sunset with a glass of wine, something I rarely did when the house was full of their chaos. The quiet felt sacred rather than lonely. My phone rang, displaying Noah's name. Actually, Ilara's phone, but she'd labeled it as Noah's for video calls with me. "Grandma? Can you see our new place?" Noah's excited face filled the screen as he spun in a circle, offering dizzying glimpses of what was clearly not an apartment, but a spacious condo with high ceilings and large windows. "It looks wonderful, Noah," I said, choosing not to comment on the obvious deception about where they were moving. "And guess what? I have my own room, and there's a pool." His enthusiasm was infectious, easing some of my worry about how the children would adjust. We talked for a few more minutes before Ilara's voice called from off-screen. "Time for bed, Noah." He said a hurried goodbye, and then surprisingly, Ilara appeared on the screen. "The kids wanted to check in," she said, her tone neutral but not hostile. "I'm glad they did. They seem excited about the new place." She nodded, hesitated, then added, "Peter's parents offered us their condo. It wasn't what we originally planned." The unnecessary lie hung between us. I simply nodded, unwilling to challenge it and disrupt this fragile moment of civil communication. "We'll bring the kids by this weekend, if that works for you," she continued. "They're already asking when they can see you." "I'd like that," I said carefully. After we hung up, I remained on the porch until the stars emerged, reflecting on how quickly everything had changed. The house behind me was emptier, but somehow fuller with possibility. The pain of these past weeks, of these past years, hadn't disappeared, but it had transformed into something more manageable. In the months that followed, a new rhythm established itself. Alara and Peter maintained a cool distance, but true to their word, they brought the children for regular visits. Noah and Lily spent one weekend a month with me, and I had dinner with them most Thursdays. Slowly, I reclaimed my home. I converted Alara and Peter's former bedroom into a sewing room, a hobby I'd abandoned years ago. The children's rooms I kept intact for their visits, though I repainted them in colors of my choosing. I reconnected with old friends, joined a book club at the local library, and even started dating a kind widower named Frank, who lived 3 doors down. Life expanded to fill the spaces that had been compressed for so long. A year after they moved out, Alara called me on a Tuesday evening. "Mom?" Her voice sounded different, hesitant, almost vulnerable. "I've been thinking a lot lately about how things were when we lived with you." I waited, not wanting to interrupt whatever difficult admission might be coming. "I wasn't fair to you," she continued. "We weren't fair. I think I always felt entitled to your house, your help, your resources, like it was owed to me somehow." "What changed?" I asked gently. She laughed, but it was self-deprecating rather than bitter. "Peter's parents came back from Florida early. We've been living with them for 2 months now, and it's challenging. I think I finally understand how you must have felt." The irony wasn't lost on either of us. "I'm not asking to move back," she quickly clarified, "but I wanted to say I'm sorry. For how we treated you. For taking advantage." It wasn't a complete reconciliation. There were still wounds that might never fully heal, trust that would take years to rebuild. But it was a beginning, an acknowledgement that might eventually lead to something better. "Thank you for saying that," I replied, my voice thick with unexpected emotion. "It means a lot to hear." Later that night, I sat in my garden, watching fireflies rise from the grass in gentle, luminous arcs. My home was truly mine again. Not just the physical structure, but the peace within it, the authority over my own space and life. The pain of confrontation, the fear of loss, the uncertainty of change, all had been worth this quiet triumph. Not just the reclaiming of my house, but the reclaiming of myself. At 69, I had finally learned that standing up for yourself isn't selfish. It's necessary. It's healing. It's love in its most honest form, both for yourself and, ultimately, for those who need to learn the value of boundaries. In the soft evening light, surrounded by the garden I'd tended for decades, I was more than just a mother, more than just a grandmother. I was Inez. And that, at last, was enough. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.